It's so good to see you all.
Okay, so they'll kick us off.
All right, can you still hear us?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you to the delegates in Belém for joining us, and thank you for everybody in the room being here. Sancha mid-bite, very nice. My name is Greg Allisberger. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations for the Schiller Institute. The Schiller Institute has been in charge of leading BC's COP delegation for the past 4 years. And we've been doing these broadcast events for the past 4 years as well. So we're really excited to hear from the group. I'm going to hand it over to Junsu, who's going to just say a few words about his COP experience. And then we're going to hand it over to Kaylee, who's going to lead the delegate questions. And then Junsu will run a Q&A after that.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Junsu. I'm the Chief of Staff for this year's COP30 delegation. I was previously a delegation myself to COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. I'm really excited because these broadcasts are a great opportunity for the BC community to sort of learn with our delegates on the ground, and for them to also answer some of our questions. So with that said, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kelly for quick intros for the delegates.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Like I've said at least 5 times already in our mic setup, it is good to see you all. And I'm excited that I see some of you in the room that I'll get to see here in Belém next week. So my name is Kaylee McCarty. I'm the Assistant Director of Programs with the Schiller Institute for Integrated Science and Society. And this is running this program is like one of my absolute favorite things of my position. Let's see here. I'll keep my introduction pretty short like that, and then give all of the other delegates a chance to introduce themselves, sort of what your role is, what department you're in, and kind of what got you interested in climate and brought you to apply to COP, and then your initial impressions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Hyla. I'm a final year Master's of Social Work student in social work. My initial draw to COP is my research experience, and a lot of the work that I do in social work is focused on refugee populations and immigrants. So really supporting displaced populations in a general sense, but also specific to climate. And that's what initially drew me to wanting to apply to COP and wanting to learn more and engage more with loss and damages and the work that's being done there. And my initial thoughts COP so far have been really great. It's been very, very much trying to be like a sponge and trying to absorb as much information as I can. There's more to share on that, obviously, but that's my initial thoughts. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Dominique. I'm a second year undergraduate student studying environmental studies and economics. Here, what drew me to COP? So I do some climate advocacy back at home, and a lot of activists have found COP to be a very helpful kind of scenario. Previously as well, I did used to follow COP with the civil society side, so they would be talking about what they're looking forward to going into COP and what their big takeaways that they felt it would have been. I also followed COP 28 and 29, in terms of reading, as it was coming through. So I really wanted to observe that process up close. My initial reactions to COP, so I'm also a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis, and so once I told them that I was going, they offered me a special party access, so that allows me to enter different spaces, including negotiations. So that's been a very interesting process to follow. Definitely unexpected, learning a lot of things, kind of seeing the true inner workings of the COP and the COP negotiations.
Hi everyone, my name is Connor O'Brien. I'm a sophomore studying international studies and economics with a minor in Russian. And I was prompted to apply for COP30 because before coming to BC, I spent about a year living in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, which experiences some of the worst air pollution in the world, especially in the winter. And so coming from America, moving there, experiencing a year in Bishkek, I really got to understand firsthand how climate can be something that exacerbates social inequality. And so I was thinking about what institutions like the United Nations are doing to address issues like this and really understand climate as a driver of social inequality. So that's what inspired me to apply to COP30. And I would say my first impressions is that it's been a lot in a very short amount of time, but it's been a great experience so far. Like Dominique, I think being able to attend some of the negotiations in real time has been just such a surreal experience because it's not like you're just sitting in on like a casual meeting, people are discussing things. These are people representing entire countries and really discussing important, tangible action items that will have effects across the world. And so being able to see that in real time and be just a few feet away from that has been really incredible to watch.
Hi, my name is Fazli. I am a second year PhD student in social defense and social change lab in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience. Okay, sorry. I hope everyone's able to hear me. I got interested in participating in COP because of my research. So I study in my doctoral research, I've studied psychological mechanisms driving climate change. And for example, how and when do people recognize harms of fossil fuel consumption directly with them, and what kind of mindsets are necessary for them to recognize themselves as part of collective climate action, and how do we feed these information about behavioral insights into policy for societal transitions, just transitions. So I feel like COP has been the place to sort of also observe how these things play a role into very big impact negotiations, like Connor said. And my initial impression of COP has been very mixed. So today was our fourth day, and I feel even within those 12 hours of you being in the blue zone and observing a lot of policy, it's like there are a lot of high ups and downs. There are some news that makes you very happy, and there are some news that makes you like, oh no, why are they doing that? So yeah, you're in for an emotional ride throughout the day. So yeah, that's been my initial observation. We'll unpack more, but
hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Swan Quinn. I'm the Associate Director of the Environmental Studies program at BC. And I applied to be part of the COP30 delegation here because I was part of last year's delegation Baku and had an absolutely transformative time thinking about my own research, which was really reinvigorated by that experience. And I was really inspired to see firsthand what sort of an incredible learning experience it is for not just students, but for faculty as well. So I was super excited to be hopefully part of this group again. So along with Professor Fasani Garo, I'm one of the faculty leads of the COP delegation this year. And my research interests align with what I'm following here at COP this week, broadly thinking about the geopolitics of resource extraction and the broader ecological and social consequences of energy transitions. And sort of another emergent interest over the last week or two has been what happens to this set of relationships and negotiations when, say, a particular major player in negotiations decides not to come. So thinking about some of those new sets of relationships that have been unfolding on the ground. And along with you, very excited to hear about the experience of the whole delegation here, and thank you all for coming.
Great. And speaking of the whole delegation here, you'll notice that it is half of us here, half of the week one folks. Everyone else is in the blue zone right now, and due to one of the very interesting things about COP each year is you kind of don't know what you're getting until you're on the ground. And so yesterday, for instance, a drive that should have taken 15 minutes, or 2 days ago, should have taken 15 minutes, took 2 hours. The infrastructure is just kind of having a hard time getting everyone around. So we thought it would be an unfair ask to have them leave early in the afternoon on one of their days of access. So they will catch you up later through social media and through our symposium in the spring, which we'll tell you more about later. And it works better for spacing. So, so on the note of, things not necessarily being what you expect when you hear about COP, when you are, far following the news. How has being here at COP in person shaped how you understand the negotiation process that you couldn't get from following the news? Whoever wants to dive in.
I can start. I think that following the news, you're only getting the headlines of breakthroughs that come through. And so observing the negotiations in real time, I didn't realize how slow the process actually is. And I think that that's a big critique of the United Nations and just public policy, legal policies in general, is how slow things move when you have to make amendments, propose them, get enough support. Obviously, all of the parties represented need to come to something they can agree on, and that's really hard at the international scale. And so seeing it in real time has showed me how difficult it actually is to pass things. And I think that that's one of the reasons why climate progress moves slower than we would hope. But yeah, I think reading it in the news, you just see when something's been passed, when something big happens. And watching it day to day, it's actually pretty slow.
I can go, and I'll go using a tangible example, because I think that'd be great for the people in the room. So I have access to some of the closed door meetings, and without like being liable for treason charges, I'm kidding. Within one of these closed door meetings, for example, the question of the UTM is an agenda proposal. So how it works at COP30 is that each agenda item receives a lot of resources. They go to the official UNFCCC process, which means that they must be discussed at this COP. There must be a decision item. And then depending on the decision item, it can like carry over into like the new COP, like it can become like a really big thing. So you have to be really intentional, like even what you talk about on the proposal. So this year there've been proposals from different like country negotiating blocks about different agenda items to add. And one of them is related to UTMs, or unilateral trade measures. And this is basically code from a lot of like heavily industrialized or like emerging economies for the CBAM, which is a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is basically a carbon tariff. So for the amount of carbon that was used to produce a good, it will now be charged a price to enter the EU. And I don't know, I definitely have my own ideas coming to COP. And I think what I've noticed in the within the negotiations is that it could, for me personally, it could feel emotionally exhausting, because in the bluntest way possible, it does feel a little bit like middle school. Like these like grown people are like, I guess like dragging things on, like coming up with like these very questionable tactics for slowing things down, for trying to get their own way. Like everybody is definitely coming in with like agendas that like probably diverge. Like everyone wants to see their own outcome and is not afraid to manipulate the scenario how they feel they must in order to get the outcome they want. And I think coming into this, I was of the idea that like the UN being the space where like everybody must agree and everyone comes to a consensus definitely leaves room for it to be like abused. And I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about this, but I think like there is a good reason to have consensus, because say for example India, like there is or South Africa, there is a genuine concern that these costs are going to be passed on to their economies, to consumers, to the workers, and that in a time when they're trying to like find more capital to advance their development agendas and to advance even sustainability agendas, this is going to be an additional cost and like burden onto their economies, which is just like not what they want right now. And I think that there is merit to feeling to like those like concerns and to like wanting those concerns addressed. And I think I'm just wondering, going through this, is if there isn't a better way than to have this long, tedious process that is kind of hard. So I feel like sometimes I genuinely wonder, like, oh, have we lost the plot a little bit? So I think that's kind of my feelings towards negotiations right now.
Bouncing off of that, I also feel that being here in person, observing these negotiations, it's so it's so very evident that during negotiations, these delegations sometimes forget that they're here for climate change and that the planet is dying literally, and so much faster than how these negotiations are going. And also to see that why they are doing that is also because each policy commitment and deal report has a price tag associated with them for those countries. So I feel like, yeah, climate change takes a back seat, and then those money negotiations take front seat. So I think that's, you would not expect that to happen here, but unfortunately, that's the system that we live in, and that's something already.
Yeah, it makes me think back to as Captain Goldberg, who former negotiator from the US, led a mock negotiation for our delegation. It, even though like obviously that was not real, it's interesting how like maybe similar some of the situations or maybe some of the tactics that we use in a mock UN setting maybe apply to some of the tactics that might exist in a real negotiation. So that's been really fascinating.
On a humorous, but maybe slightly not humorous note, in our mock negotiation, we were like coming to the end. And then the person who was simulating country was like, actually, never mind. I changed my mind. And to me, I was like, this couldn't happen in real life. This is so funny. And then I was sitting in a meeting, and so I happened for myself, and I was floored. I was like, oh, like these are definitely like, it's like a human process, which is sometimes a good thing because like there's also points where I have seen, this is gonna make it seem negative, but it's a human process. So there are times when people who formerly disagreed, like now agree. Like I have also seen that where like in a large group meeting, someone brings something up and it's like, oh, well, actually we disagree with this. And then in the smaller meeting, like we have reevaluated our stance in terms of like, in light of like this new information that's brought. So even though people are coming in with competing agendas, it's not that people are completely closed off. I won't hog the time now, but like I'm so interested to like talk about that more. But yeah, but it definitely is like from the mock negotiations, like it is like a very human process. And I think the humanness shows sometimes in the good and the bad.
So what about COP30 would you recommend that people pay attention to, even if it might not be on like the biggest headlines?
I think I would try to answer that question. So I would say the hierarchy that plays the role inside these conversations, even though it is one of the biggest, not one of the biggest, the biggest and largest climate change conference where so many countries are participating, but even then, who gets to say what is very already like predetermined. And so I feel like, yeah, I'm still like processing that how do we move away from the hierarchy and the countries that actually need support, are they even being listened to? So that's, then I'm gonna just leave here so that others also could say something about it.
Yeah, to bounce off that. I feel like I've learned so much about like the Pacific Islands, like obviously like the Pacific Islands here, but also like I attended a session with one of the plans. It was the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. There we go, CRI. And it was like 3 Pacific countries or islands that were talking about the infrastructure work that they were doing to support loss and damages. And it's like, you know, maybe my more Western perspective, like wasn't even aware of the amount of work that was going into it and the research that's being done. And I think it was very perspective shifting. So I definitely like resonate with Fazli's point of like paying attention to where countries are maybe falling and their voice in the discussions.
I guess building off of power construction a little bit, I would say I personally am interested to see about the UTM. I might encourage people to look at that, not just to see like if like this carbon pricing integrated carbon pricing, carbon tariff, like right, unilateral trade measures. Unilateral trade measures, which is basically code for like the carbon border adjustment mechanism. are carbon tariffs, like very simplistically, but I'm interested to see if like that ends up, so the UTM would basically like, be kind of like a condemnation of the EU, like implementing their, carbon tariffs, again, using kind of like the simplified term. And so I'm interested to see if that would happen because it would it would kind of show like the power of like emerging markets, I guess, like in the global sphere now, in a space that has like typically been dominated, I guess, by like the EU, for example. And I feel like that also says things about like sovereignty and like global collaboration and like where do we kind of draw the line and like how do we feel about certain things. So I'm interested to see how that comes out.
I think something that might not be maybe one of the biggest headlines, but that I've seen in a lot of just scrolling through the list of daily negotiations that are occurring is specifically Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement, and that deals with just transitions. And there's been a lot of debate and discussion, and at least from the meetings that I've sat in on, not a lot of progress in terms of consensus on the issue of more developed economies providing resources for less developed economies in order to transition away from fossil fuel usage. And so I think that coming out of COP30, that could be one of the, sorry, I think we have a.
The dogs are.
Might not
He's-
be,
Yeah, the dog is outraged at the lack of progress as well. But I think that coming out of COP30, that could either be a really big breakthrough that could happen, or the alternative of not really much happening, especially as we receive the summaries and reports from the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions from countries come in. I think that even if we see progress on Article 9.1 or not, that will set the tone for COPs in the future for sure. And the status of just transitions in general.
And if I can maybe just hop in real quickly, I think one of the flip sides of the speed of negotiations or the lack thereof, is that, you know, there are in the headlines, so much of the focus is on, of course, carbon emissions, NDCs, the financial contributions, loss and damage, all these like super critical components of how to mitigate and adapt to climate change. But the whole agenda and set of processes that's unfolding is so much more diverse than that as well. And you see that reflected in all of the side events and the processes unfolding, both across the blue zone and the green zone. And just as one example, yesterday, so each day at COP this year has its own set of themes guiding what the conversations revolve around. And yesterday, one of the top themes was culture. And it was, I believe, the first time that culture has been a headline topic at a COP. And so you saw such fascinating conversations unfolding around that, including, for example, around Article 12, which is about communication of climate information and thinking about new proposals to develop funding to support climate communication in developing countries as a way to help broaden support, which without that, none of these changes will be possible to create consensus. So that's sort of, you know, outside of the headlines, there are all these other dimensions unfolding as well that I think sort of reflect the breadth of society and the whole society environment change that climate represents as well. So that's been really fascinating.
So what has it meant for COP to exist in Brazil specifically, either for like your interpretation or your experience of it, or for the negotiations at this broader level?
And if I can just interrupt quick before we answer, is everyone able to hear us all right still? Are things coming through? Okay, great, thank you.
I can start this one off. I think that not only is it important that COP30 is in Brazil, but specifically in the city of Belém with its proximity to the Amazon. And on all of the logos, on all of the PR and like advertising for COP30, it doesn't just say COP30 Brazil or just COP30 Belém, it says COP30 Amazonia. And so centering discussion and dialogue around deforestation, around issues affecting the Amazon, and also around indigenous rights, I think have all been three really key factors of the negotiations, the side events, the pavilions, and just the general discourse that's been generated around this COP. And so I think having it in Brazil is a really important step for the UNFCCC and COP to take in general to address specifically these key issues and how they're affecting Brazil in real time.
Yeah, following on that. So I'm sure most of us would have seen in the news and also us who are here. They established the GFFF, Tropical
yes.
Forest Forever facility, which I don't think would have been possible anywhere else other than in Brazil, where countries like Germany, Norway, Sweden have committed more than $1 billion to restoring these forests all across the world. And some countries are still negotiating how much fund they would want to put into this. And any country can take funds out of it and use it in their country, to restore and preserve more and more rainforest. On that note, also, I feel like going back to the question of what might not be covered in the media, I feel like media is paying too much attention on rainforest just because it's in Brazil. And there are so many other things which are also important when we are in a climate change conference. But I think these conversations are happening in the event, but it's not coming up. So that's also something that we as delegates could also contribute to the conversation and move it away from. So maybe.
Something that I'm excited about, but also disappointed about it being held here in Belém is the coverage of Indigenous rights, Indigenous issues. So you guys may or may not be aware that there was this protest that received a lot of international attention where a group of Guarajaja people from the Amazon region who live nearby have been experiencing this encroachment of, I guess, different land grabs and I guess the erosion of their sovereignty over their land. Brazil recently opened up rights for exploratory drilling. There's logging, and there was this very key snippet that was processed around where it's one of the leaders saying you don't need money. And I think for us, especially in a Western consciousness, money or development is always seen as a plus. But I think obviously this ecological disaster says otherwise. And I was really hoping for this COP that is supposed to be the Indigenous Peoples COP would have been centered on Indigenous knowledge and I guess going back to traditional small scale, less resource intense, I guess ways of living, of producing food, of systems and means of production and community. And unfortunately, I think what I'm seeing is a little bit of what happens often with youth in climate spaces where there's tons of youth on the outside. There are so many young people and they're all so excited. They all have these great ideas. And then they're outside and going into the room and it's the same. I literally start recognizing the same people in the meetings, the same delegates, the same representatives. But also not to be overly pessimistic, there are thematic days. So next week technically is a thematic day for Indigenous people. So maybe we'll see more conversation and representation then. I guess I was just hoping to see it as more of a through line, but at least it's on the agenda. So at least, they're getting their own dedicated space. So I guess that's also a plus.
That's really interesting jumping off of that because I'm the only person in this room so far who has yet to be in the blue zone. And so I've spent most of my time either in the green zone or at other places around Belém where there are a lot of COP inspired spaces. And I spent some time at the Museum of the Amazon and it feels like there are some art installations and museum exhibits that are focusing a lot on Indigenous rights and considerations. And so it has felt very prominent from my current vantage point. So it's really interesting to hear that it's not being seen as much in the spaces where the conversations are.
I think even today in the green zone, I was very inspired by the presence of them because they were around, but then there were also we don't speak Portuguese, but there's sessions happening as well. Our climate sessions are happening in Portuguese, are tailored for the locals.
Yeah.
And they're full. I was not expecting necessarily for them to be full, but it shows that there is a local environmentalism around the people. And there definitely are, again, a lot of I guess like indigenous presence, like in the COP like space, like you go in there and you see them every day.
Mhm.
And I think that's the benefit of having it here. Like I think, you know, in terms of like where they're physically located, you know, like ease of access and accessibility to these populations. I guess in the like, so in all of the meetings I've been in, I've only seen one where the indigenous people's constituency was represented. And I got to speak to the person, which was really exciting. But he's an indigenous person from the Pacific Islands. So I guess like that's kind of like whose voice, going back to whose voices are being represented in the room.
I have a whole list of questions that I'm excited to ask them, but I think we'd like to open it up to questions of folks in the room.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's been awesome listening to you guys talk, and especially I think, Dominique, you bring in like a vantage point that we haven't had before, which is awesome and definitely something that I want to talk to you about at some point later or during this conversation if we get the time to do that. Um, One thing that I mean, I've been following the COP pretty closely the past 2 years, and I feel like usually there's always like a central theme to every single COP, even though there's negotiations happening on pretty much every single possible topic out there. Like COP28 was the global stock take. COP29 was like the finance COP with the NCGQ. And I feel like there's always been like a main draft text. And I feel like that's something that, at least from my vantage point, I feel like has been missing this year. So I was just wondering, like, is there like a major draft that we should be looking at?
Wait, sorry. Like draft is in, what do you think the policy outcome will be, or more generally, what do you think the theme of COP is?
Well, I mean, kind of both.
I have heard kind of two narratives that people have been pushing to title this COP. One is the COP of implementation. I feel like going to events around the pavilions, I've heard a lot of people calling this the COP of implementation, especially getting back these summaries and reports relating to the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, and seeing that we are not on track to hit, 1.5 degrees of global warming. We're not anywhere near the finance that they've predicted is necessary to save our planet. And so trying to reconcile us not being on path with how we can get there. A lot of talks I've gone to focus on how do we mobilize the finance? How do we implement this? How do we start taking the steps that we should have been taking for the past, 10, 15 years? I've also heard this called the COP of Truth. Because I know that the Brazilian presidency, in the opening ceremony and in a few remarks, has pushed for more transparency from countries, about their reporting, about their agendas, about the steps that they're taking with respect to climate. And so I think that this is the first COP, if I'm not mistaken, to specifically advocate for truth and transparency, concretely, and to try to implement that into discussions. So which one of those narratives will come out on top? I'm not quite sure, but I've heard those two. I'm interested if anyone else has heard of their names thrown around.
I think a COP of growth has been going around because President Lula included that in his speech, asking for more accountability from countries, and also I think he also included in his speech where he said that we also need to recognize failures, that Paris Agreement, we failed at implementing Paris Agreement, and it's been like 10 years, so we need to recognize our failures before we move into action. But yeah, it's still the fourth day, so. And on the document, I think if you go to COP's website, there is a provisional agenda that you can download. And I heard that they're gonna remove that soon from the website, maybe by the middle of next week, because then they're gonna have like more edited versions of it. So right now it's like a draft. That can be done.
I definitely agree. It's been called, I hear COP of implementation most, especially in the like official meetings that I go to. I think I spent too much time there, but I'm sorry for going to less of those. But I think it's been called the COP of implementation most. I would say even though that's the branding that it's kind of going for, the actual conversations that I hear are a lot focused on adaptation. And at first I was a little bit confused, like why this sudden push for adaptation? I think one thing that I've been hearing a lot is that it's not sudden. There's always been kind of like a low underlying call for adaptation. But then if we think about this year and last year and the year before that, each of these years have been the hottest years on record. Like there've been more flooding, there've been more people displaced, there've been more like the impacts of climate change are getting harder and harder to ignore. Oh, 2 weeks ago, there was Hurricane Melissa, which devastated Jamaica. Literally the day before COP started, there was a second typhoon that hit the Philippines and like displaced, I think the number I saw last was like over 400,000 people, 400 lives lost, which is absolutely insane to think about. And so I think that's how we're definitely hearing these calls for adaptation. Like the climate crisis is here. Like there's no like pretending otherwise. And so I think definitely countries have been asking like, okay, we need to be doing something for the right now as well. And that looks like adaptation. So I've been hearing that quite often in the negotiating rooms. And I think in terms of like what an outcome document might look like for that. I mean, I personally am following the just transition, so we need to produce the decision document this year. Otherwise, it's very likely that this area of like the negotiations will not continue in the future because if a group is being unproductive, then it's not continued. And it's been unproductive for the past 3 years, so it's set for review next year, and this might get cut if we don't produce something. And it's been a contentious issue, so if we're able to do it, then it might become like the breakthrough documents. It is, Kaylee just gonna look at me, it's kind of looking unlikely, because they know, because I've been like sharing like the inside scoop of what goes on in the meetings, like it's a pretty contentious issue. What I think is more likely to be like the like outcome document is the 9.1, which is the section of the Paris Agreement, which talks about climate finance and the India, Arab group countries, South Africa, LNDC, so these are like emerging economies, have really been pushing for that for like climate finance to be mobilized so that this can be the cloud of implementation. I don't think they want to go home without having that in written text. So I think if we're lucky, that might be the breakthrough document of this COP, like a document about like, this is, climate finance going forward.
Thank you, guys. That was very helpful.
So, hi, it's Tara over here. How are you? It's good to see you all. I wanted to ask a question to follow up on Jesse's comment about the United States not being present at this COP, which is very unusual. And how are people talking about the United States in the rooms that you're listening to those conversations? And also, how are people responding to you as delegates coming from a US university?
Well, the question was addressed to you, so I think you can.
Well, it's something for everyone. I just wanted to follow up on that point. I'm sure all of you have experiences or insights into what that's like.
I can go first because I'll be quick, because I've been long for all of the other questions. In the negotiations, but I'm also mostly in G77 meetings. It's G77 and China officially, and then I go to some of the big group plenaries. The USA is not brought up at all. Like the first time I heard, which is very strange, because last year I heard from a lot of people that like people were very cognizant of the fact that the US was not there. Like it was something that permeated the conversations. Like, oh my gosh, the US is here. Like, what does that mean? I've not heard the US come up a single time in the negotiating rooms. The first time I heard the US come up was in a press conference yesterday that was held by civil society. It was different activist groups that were having like a call for justice, like to remind people to put pressure on their leaders. And the US came up, of course, in that area, that we need to demand more accountability. But that was from civil society. From the other governments, nothing at all.
I think just in my interactions with other people attending COP30, when I say that I'm from the US, I think in the back of our minds, we both know what that means in terms of discussions around climate and, you know, all of our role in this. But I've experienced a few people telling me like good for you that at least you're here and that we can see that Americans are still thinking about this, still care about this, regardless of, you know, what our president might have to say about it. And even 2 days ago, there was Governor Gavin Newsom came to COP30, and America, or a lot of like American politicians, people from American universities came in to speak, and they really highlighted local initiatives, showing that America is still dedicated to addressing climate and kind of things at the state and local level that people are doing. So I think in terms of the role that America plays, obviously a very minimal role in the actual discussions and negotiations. But in terms of just our public diplomacy, I think it's been interesting to see the narrative shift to, you know, what local and state governments are doing to address this, and to show that regardless of who the president is, we still have a commitment that spans longer than 4 years to climate.
If I might just add to that briefly as well, I mean, I echo a lot of the same sentiments that were shared here. And I think it's been really interesting to see that when a power vacuum forms, it is filled. And, you know, I think a lot of us have seen this in many spaces, whether it's Gulf countries stepping in to take leading roles, whether we value that as positive or negative based on the conversation, or seeing how overflowing the China pavilion is at different times as speakers unfold. Like, I think it speaks actually to the conversation we were having earlier about the theme of COP and thinking about implementation or truth. And I feel like in some ways, sort of sitting at the intersection of those two is a real pragmatism, and where sort of actors at all scales are sort of looking at that saying, okay, the US isn't here. Cool, we're going to move on. And so whether that is collaborations between different industries, the local scales of governance stepping in, people are trying to find alternative pathways. And in some cases, you know, I think this is reflected in some media narratives at times, but saying, in some ways, great, this actually helps things move in more pragmatic directions as opportunities emerge. We'll see how that continues to unfold over the coming 10 days or so. But it has been really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I would also say it's also been a pleasant surprise learning about like how invested like US actors that I've engaged with are in climate change. Jesse, Connor and I got to attend an event yesterday with former Vice President Al Gore. And he started a climate change foundation, the Climate Reality Project.
I believe the data project is Climate Trace.
Yes.
But part of like, yeah, bigger initiatives.
Yeah, part of the project, yes. And he started 5.5, 6 years ago. And they data track emissions across the globe, and he, you know, addressed the fact that the United States is no longer tracking emissions. And he was like, this is gonna be, we are producing this solution that can potentially combat and still support, you know, tracking emissions across the globe and still provide information that's needed. And I think that's really awesome to see how dedicated our, you know, whether they're former or current politicians are engaged in this topic.
Hi, thanks. It's really neat to talk to somebody at COP finally. So the special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees had a sentence in it that I can't forget. It's explicit carbon prices remain a necessary condition of ambitious climate policies. So I'm glad that there's talk about CBM. I'm a little concerned that, you know, there's definitely equity concerns about it, but I would hate to see the EU CBM eliminated. I think, you know, CBMs are going to be an important part of pushing the carbon price around the world. So I just was wondering if you've heard of other carbon pricing topics. There's a kind of minimum global carbon price necessary, you know, for a 1.5 degrees future, which I guess is about $1 billion per ton right now, but or a 2 degrees future from previous IPCC reports. So I'd just like to hear what you're hearing about carbon pricing. Thank you.
I might nerd out a little bit. Does anybody else want to add anything to it?
Oh, sorry.
So I'll be honest, I did not get the first half of your question. I also feel like you're probably way more educated than me on this, but initially coming into COP, like I was very interested in like carbon credits and carbon pricing. Before coming to COP, I was able to attend this climate conference that was held with the Salada Institute at Harvard, where they were talking about their vision for an integrated carbon market that was built based off of CBAM. And that, I guess, like proposal or kind of like idea was adopted into the COP presidency to have discussions about an integrated carbon market that could be globally scalable. What does that conversation look like at COP? That's a great question. What is the pushback against the CBAM? When I came, to be honest, I was not expecting that much pushback because in doing research about CBAM before I came, because I just wanted to have some background before being in the negotiations, a lot of the research that I personally have read, which is kind of surface level, the conclusions were that yes, CBAM would have this kind of like inequity, I guess, measure built into it that would kind of it would be allocating like resources in the form of like this money to the EU. So there's an equity problem there of like the capital flows. But the research that I saw, was like for the good that it will do, I guess, environmentally in terms of like erasing carbon leakage, which is just like when instead of being produced in the EU, the carbon is being produced overseas. So in terms of like closing that gap, like CBAM would have the potential to close that gap and in the comparative, I guess, economic loss in productivity and like the inequity would actually not be that bad was basically the conclusion from what I had read. Coming into COP, however, definitely this idea is not agreed upon by the countries. There are certain countries who, I don't know if I should necessarily go out and name, they feel very extremely strongly about CBAM, bringing it as a proposal under the UTM, unilateral trade measures. They see it as a breach of sovereignty. In one negotiation, they called it a coercive breach of the people's national ability to affect their own climate agendas. To me, the word coercive was so strong. There was another meeting where they said that, this is a redistribution of wealth from the poorest to the richest countries. I do think that there are equity concerns here. And I think at least within the proposal, say for example, that I read from Harvard, of the tiered pricing to take into account the different, levels of, the economic levels of each country. I don't know. I think that probably would definitely have trade-offs in terms of carbon leakage and things like that. I wish it would be a conversation. From what I hear about the UTM, it's definitely not a conversation. They want the UN to come out with the force of 190 something parties, in consensus saying this is not allowed and we should shut it down immediately. I think Brazil has been trying to not take that approach. Within the event, so there's an event on Friday, which is the thematic day of climate finance, which I've had on my calendar for a week now, which is a meeting talking about integrating carbon markets. I'm really excited to go to that. That's being held, I'm pretty sure, by the Brazil as the leader of COP to kind of have these countries in open dialogue. I'm not sure if this fully answers your question, but if I understood your question, it was, how is this kind of carbon pricing and CBAM being spoken about at COP with a lot of condemnation coming from specifically these very fossil fuel heavy economies that have heavy industry. I will say China, I'll name them because they haven't been as aggressive. China has not been as aggressive as I expected in terms of pushing against it, but the G77 position is against it. And I think underneath that is China being a silent kind of opposition to it. But yeah, I'm also interested to see how this looks. It's not being a conversation, at least not in my opinion right now. It's kind of some countries are pushing for it to be thrown off the table completely.
Hi, it's Laura. How are you
Hey.
guys? I'm glad. It sounds like you're doing really well and learning a lot and seeing a lot. Tell me about food security and food insecurity. I know last year that was an issue that was of a great deal of interest with respect to how important it is to be able to continue to produce food, and yet the nitrous oxides emissions and other emissions from the fertilizer contributes to greenhouse gases. So I wondered if you guys can talk a little bit, or if anyone has delved into that and seen any talks about that. Is it on, you can even tell me, is it on the agenda? I know you guys have been looking at the agenda. Is it on the agenda? Have you seen anything?
It is on the agenda. I at least have not been following it closely or attending those sessions, but at least my general sense, walking around looking at pavilions, and hearing some of the conversations, including inside events, is that there is a lot of conversation happening around sustainable agriculture, thinking about the connections between food security and emissions of various forms. But a lot of times what I've been hearing, at least, it is sort of connected to some of those issues of sovereignty, and thinking about the multiple forms of sustainability that are required to pursue these goals. But I haven't been following it closely. Does anybody?
I haven't been following it closely either, but Hannah and I had the chance to sit in on a youth discussion around agriculture, food insecurity, things like that. And something that stuck out to me was, for the most part, it wasn't like a negotiation. It was a lot of youth activists, different groups there, just to have dialogue around it, not necessarily propose amendments or like a list of actionable items, or a work program to address it, kind of just to have some dialogue around it. And something that stuck out to me was towards the end of that, a youth negotiator or representative from the Indigenous peoples constituency really pushed for an inclusion of the contributions of Indigenous peoples in discussions around food systems, agriculture, production, and really pushing for that to be part of the dialogue around that. So that was really interesting to me. I'm not sure if you got anything else out of that.
Yeah, but I would say that was like a real highlight for me, and also I think it was important because we also had negotiators who were in the discussion who were answering and taking feedback from the youth or younger participants. And I think seeing that dialogue as well and listening to their responses of like what's going on in the negotiation groups is also very impactful as well. Because I don't think they really held back, which I appreciated. And the negotiators did their best in what they could answer.
And I think going off based on the thematic days, systems, agriculture, and equity is November 9th. And so maybe that's when we have more conversations around it.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the second question now, so I'm sorry. And I may have missed the beginning, maybe you talked about this, in which case we'll just skip, but the experience of walking around. So are you, as you're walking around, who do you, are there others, like, are there other students there? What do you feel like are there faculty there? Or is it largely, do you think, people from NGOs from all over the world? What do you see, describe the group of people that you're walking between and amongst in these sessions with?
I think
You know who they are? What's the age group? That's another one.
age group is definitely, I would say, between 18 to 45 is the majority. If you don't count delegations are old. But the people who are participating and coming to represent organizations, I think 80 to 50 maybe, yes, would be the age group. And it's extremely diverse. And going by the numbers, I think Brazil registered some 3,000 plus delegation, including the party and party overflow and nonprofits. So you see a lot of representation from indigenous groups based off of Brazil. And walking around, I want to say that I personally observe a lot of echo chambers. So if you see, for example, indigenous group has a pavilion called Indigenous Peoples Pavilion, and then in there, when the discussions are happening, conversations, you would only see Indigenous people. It's very, very rare to see someone else from other part of the world being there, part of the discussion. If you go around countries like Chad, Tanzania, their pavilion, you would see people only from there who are more interested in discussing and debating. So I feel like there's a lot of like we might perceive the COP to be like a place where we can interact with anyone, but I don't think that much interactions are going on so far that I've seen in 3 days. It's like people have certain interests and they're just talking about that, and we are not moving away from a comfort zone to find what others think. These issues.
Anybody else want to answer that?
I would agree in that the majority demographic is probably from around 18 to 45. I would say there have been a lot of talks that I've sat in on, or negotiations I've observed, and I feel like I'm the youngest in the room. But that also makes sense given that it's such a big platform. It takes a lot to secure a badge and to even get the opportunity to attend COP. With all of the costs associated with it. Obviously, we're very grateful to have the opportunity from Boston College to be here. So I would say usually I get the sense that it's a lot of people working with NGOs, working in climate. As in terms of panels, usually older, I would say it tends to lean sharing like decades of experience that they've worked on a certain issue, things like that. But I have connected with a few other students from American universities. So I think in terms of American representation, it seems like academia is a really big makeup of people from America who are here. But that also might just be in the spaces that I'm going to. Like a few mornings I attended a Ringo session, which is for researchers and independent NGOs. So the academia spheres tend to lean, I would say, towards younger people, students, things like that.
I'll make a small contribution. I have not been spending as much time in the pavilions that I necessarily expected myself to. And then also as someone with a party badge, so this is like an official delegation, I've been very like keyed into like who has access to spaces and who doesn't. So like I'm very keenly aware of this thing. And so like and also I feel like a lot of it's like a general thing. So like the people in the pavilions are not necessarily people you see in the negotiations. I don't know if it's because I've been like integrated into my negotiating block. I've been like very fortunate to have the senior negotiator be introduced to me. And so she's kind of been like showing me the ropes a little bit informally. And when I go into, say, for example, like a coordination meeting, so this is within a negotiating block to kind of like have our position before we go into like a wider negotiation. We're told when the next meetings are informally, they're not on the official COP agenda, which I guess goes back to transparency. So sometimes I forget, like I don't write it down and I don't know, or like you don't know where the room is because the rooms get assigned. And so even as somebody with like the party badge, like I'm not able to go into all of the meetings that I technically do have access to. Sometimes they're hearing from the chair of the meeting, like directly, like 30 minutes before, because it is a working kind of scenario. And then some of the larger like plenaries that are like widely, I guess, like kind of like you have access to and stuff like that. They let people with the party badge in first, and then I sometimes see, like observers like lining up and like waiting to get in, and stuff like that. I often see like, the indigenous groups and like observers, youth, party overflow, like waiting outside and just like doing their own things outside and having their own conversations outside. I began to like recognize like the negotiators like I enter the room with, because again, like it's like it feels, I guess, like a little bit of a separate space. Yeah. Oh, one fun thing that I wanted to add, Leslie, is that the only pavilion I've seen with like a diverse group of people is the CARICOM pavilion. So that's a self-plug. I don't know what they're doing in there. Like sometimes I'm like doing a double take. I'm like, wait, is this like what's going on in here? Oh, sorry. CARICOM is the Caribbean community. So the Caribbean Pavilion there's always like different like ethnicities and like different people in there. Sometimes doing a double check and I'm like, what is going on in there? Like, what are all these people doing?
All right, so quickly to the point on CBAM, I'm sure the delegates on ground know better, but yesterday there was actually a draft leak on the CBAM verification methodology and talks about how it's going to be linked to the UETS and whatnot. So I think it'll be interesting to see how all of these questions and the answers play out in the the coming days. But with that said, I'm gonna close with one last quick question for the delegates. Um, what has given you the most hope during the first few days of COP?
I can start. I think hearing the talk from former Vice President Al Gore gave me a lot of hope in terms of the United States context in advancing climate initiatives. I did not know that such an extensive database had been produced and was being worked on, much less by Al Gore, but I think that the implications of what that data could be used for can help us take some really vital next steps in climate, especially in the US, but also across the world. He was showing just a few instances of where they've been able to specifically trace power plants and things across the world and save all of these tons of carbon emissions with concrete data. So that was really exciting. Gave me some hope.
I can go next. I think even though as we have discussed, like they have not had as prominent of a focus as they should, but I do think that the representation and hopefully forthcoming inclusion of Indigenous voices and Indigenous work has given me hope. On Monday, I attended a session with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and there was an Indigenous person on the panel who spoke about their experiences of working in deforestation, as well as their personal experiences from growing up and caring for the forest. So I think that, hearing a personal and professional, examples of the power of Indigenous work has given me a lot of hope, and I think will propel me through the rest of this week.
For me, I have to say it's the people in the climate work. So I think the first kind of moment where I was like, oh, maybe I'm looking at this a little bit too pessimistically was on Monday. Kyle and I had been invited to like a smaller session with these senior like climate negotiators. Not all of them had like always been at COP negotiations, but all of them had been working in human rights or climate change. And these are like seasoned professionals, some of them are like the top of their agencies. And it was like a small dinner and we're kind of like getting to know each other. And all of them were still hopeful and passionate about their work. So that kind of made me think, like, I've only been here for 3 days and like, I'm like feeling down. Like, I don't think you could be doing this for 30 years and like not go crazy if it was all bad. So that was kind of like, you know what, like, I'm sure there's like a fullness to the process. Like maybe there's an immediacy that I'm experiencing that these people who've been here for 30 years, like, no, just does not come overnight. And so it kind of gave me hope that there's like a bigger picture that I'm missing. And if they know it and they seem fine, then I can trust them. And I think another thing that gave me hope was some of us were able to meet the Minister of Environment and Climate Action of St. Kitts. And it was just really heartwarming to again see how passionate like she is about this. Like she has created like a lot of change in St. Kitts in like such a short amount of time. Like she's been on the scene the last section of 2022, so like for 3 years or so. And like she's like I would say relatively a young person, like she's in her like mid-30s or so. So like still like very fired up, still like passionate and like doing like a lot and like doing the hard work. She's like, because she's doing so much, like she's come under like a lot of like political attack and it's like she's just like the work gotta get done, so I gotta do it. So that gave me a lot of hope. And then the last thing that gave me hope happened yesterday. I got to meet one of my friends who is a professional climate activist, like that's their job and they get paid. They literally plan like actions, or they call it like street theater. It's basically protests. They plan protests, and seeing them like in their natural element, like they gave a press conference and then we were talking and then they were like meeting other people and these other like grassroots organizing, and they were telling me like about the work they're doing and the importance of COP for I guess like these small grassroots people, I guess reminded me that there is a place for everyone at COP, even if the power distribution is, I wouldn't even say less ideal, is not ideal. I think like even just seeing, like just like seeing my friend and like seeing them so passionate and fired up, was really helpful. I was able to share with them some insights too, so hopefully I don't get arrested, but it was fun.
I also have a similar chain of thought where on Monday, like on day one, when I'm trying to make sense of what's going on here, I'm also getting more and more pessimistic. I was like, oh, all these are just conversation. How are they going to translate into decisions and actions? And then I ended up speaking with someone from a delegation who helped me map out how this works and how it's actually very important in terms of like national commitments and how negotiations don't directly lead to action, they lead to strategies. Is exactly what he said, and then strategies take more time to come into action on ground. So we definitely do need COP, because I was just thinking, do we need this every year? Like, what's the point of it, bringing so many people together? But looking at things from their lens, and like how Dominique said that people have been working on it for 30 years and we were tired in 3 days. I feel like that does bring a lot of hope, that, and also some sort of peace that there are dedicated people who are on it. And we don't have to be very hopeless. So yeah, that brings us hope.
I know we're over time, but maybe just two quick things. I've been really impressed at the large scale events with the headline celebrities, that at each of those, they've been supported by a cast of really amazing other people, mayors, other governors, industry leaders, nonprofit heads who are not just calling for action, but reporting on successful action and delivering. And so while we might be moving slowly, the actions are happening, and that's been really impressive. And I'd also just say, the group that has been here to have be part of sharing this experience together and to have a significant part of that be so joyful, to be dealing with these pretty dire but exciting things, but to be able to laugh and learn together has been really amazing and helpful. So thanks to you all.
Yeah. And there's nothing to add to that. I echo a lot of what they've said. So thank you so much for being here and being part of the conversation. It was really enjoyable for us, speaking for myself, and I can tell around the room that it's been nice to kind of reflect and share with you all. And I'm really excited to see those of you who I will be seeing next week here. And just a reminder that we'll have another conversation next Thursday at the same time, same place, same bat channel. We thank you for the few people who got that reference. And I hope to see you next Thursday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care. And thanks, Jen.